Welcome to Unlearn, where we talk to industry leaders about unlearning how we go to market.
I'm Kelly Sarabyn, and I run tech partner enablement and advocacy at HubSpot.
And I'm Mathew, co-founder of Partnership Leaders.
The old ways of going to market are getting more expensive and less effective.
To thrive in an era of digital transformation, you have to go to market differently. Let's find out how. Hey, everybody. Welcome back to another episode of the Unlearn podcast. This is a super special one because we were told by a number of people to have Mekaela on the podcast. And then we did a Partnership Leaders event in Mountain View where somebody on our team was there. And she was like, oh my God, you really need to have Mekaela on the podcast. I'm like, okay, great. I've heard about Mekaela a lot. And the background is I was talking to Brian Gibson, who is the VISTA Equity Alliances and Channels operating partner. They're basically private equity firms have these people on staff who advise their portfolio companies on best practices. And Brian Gibson is the guy for partnerships. Now, What's also interesting, and this might be a fun thing to start the convo on, is I asked Brian Gibson, I was like, hey, Brian, how many companies in your portfolio leverage partnerships as a go-to-market motion? And he's like, 30%. And I'm like, how many companies do you have? He's like, 80 companies. I'm like, amazing. So then I went back and then I was on a call with another one of my friends. And I'm like, you know what's interesting is VISTA has 80 companies and only 30% of them use partnerships. And my other friend, Tom Elliott, was like, that doesn't sound correct. So okay. So Tom says, go ask them what percentage of their companies use integrations to fulfill their value proposition. So I went back to Brian Gibson. I'm like, hey, Brian, what percentage of your companies use integrations to fulfill their value proposition? Brian's like, 85% of them. And I'm like, well, Brian, then 85% of your companies use partnerships. And he was like, oh, yeah, totally. I get it, So I'm excited for this convo. So, Mekaela, welcome to the show. We'll introduce ourselves, but let's hear a little bit about you first.
Yeah, thank you. I'm so excited to be here. I've been kind of following along on what you're doing with Partnership Leaders and with this podcast, which, for those of us who have been doing this a long time, this is so overdue. So I love the emphasis, and you've been able to make a lot of traction in a short amount of time. So I'm watching here, impressed, excited to get more involved, and love, to be a guest here today. So yeah, how far back do you want to go? Did they all ask you that? I think everyone asks you that.
Totally.
Yeah.
That's a good one, but a little bit more context. And so I asked Brian Gibson, I said, Brian, who is the best partnership leader in your portfolio companies? And then he was like, Mekaela Davis. I'm like, okay, we got to have Mekaela Davis on this podcast.
So I like how Asher just let that hanging for the audience to conclude on their own what the connection was between VISTA Equity and the guest on the show.
Yes.
That's why we don't prepare for this podcast. We just run straight through it.
Well, that is wonderful to hear. And Brian is great. And truly, VISTA is great. They have a really great thing going, which maybe we'll dig into some components of that in a little bit. But yeah, so that's been a great relationship. It's interesting the way that partnerships surface in life and at work. And that's one of those areas where it's not something that you would really think about. But when you've been doing this a long time, you find ways to make a partnership out of just about anything. And that's a good example of one of those areas where you wouldn't readily think about it. It's not like we're tracking KPIs on VISTA and how we work with VISTA from a partnership perspective, but there's some really good, nuggets of value that we can talk about in that dynamic too, I think. But yeah, so just happy to be here. Again, I think that's a good illustration that you're talking to all the right people, all the right folks are coming to the surface and sharing their stories about how partnerships and alliances is really changing everything, not just the go-to-market, but the structure of their companies, the way that their employees work, which I think is a big one. That's probably something that makes me a little bit different in my approach that maybe we can dig into a little bit. Even though this is a scaling type operation, and we think about it that way typically, I really do start with people first. I think that's what my approach different and our company's approach different. I try to carry that with me wherever I go. I think what's interesting though is what I probably should have been is an engineer. So if I were kind of designing my life, I probably should have been an engineer. I love to see how things work. I am the type of person that if my husband sends me to the spa, I'm looking all around the room. I'm like dissecting where the equipment is, like what the chairs are made out of, how they applied the tile, what color is the grout. Can you hear
Sounds
me?
like a very relaxing experience. I'm sure that was your husband's intention.
So relaxing.
You're like, what's your SLAs for like?
Are you type A? Is that what I'm hearing?
Maybe just a little bit. Maybe a little bit. No, there's no chill in my life. Maybe that's one of the things that makes me, pretty good at this. But I probably should have been an engineer. I'll tell you what I wanted to be was a surgeon. I still wish I were a surgeon sometimes. I really like to think about, fixing things that are broken or making things that are suboptimal just work a little bit better. That's just sort of the nature of my mindset. So I approach most things that way. Plus, I just always wanted to be Dr. Mekaela.
Surgery sounds really tough, though, I have to say. You have to be there like 21 hours, and you really need good fine motor skills, which is interesting because it's very tough to get into medical school, but nowhere on the test is like, what are your fine motor skills? Because if not, you are not going to be a good surgeon.
That is so true. I got to drop a podcast real quick just because it sort of bridges the gap between engineering and my should have been profession of being a surgeon. It's called One Nerd to Another. And it's literally just a bunch of episodes about individual organs in the body and what they do. I know
love that.
It sounds nuts. It's really cathartic to listen to. I highly recommend the duodenum episode. And this is just what you get. This is what you get. So
when you do make a spa appointment, this is the podcast you listen to.
Organs.
Doing their job or not? Okay.
Totally.
This is going to be an amazing podcast, guys. But just to set the stage, Kelly, I know you want. So what we want to do in this podcast is really focus on your journey to become a CPO, right? Because there's a number of people out there that want to become CPOs. I think every week or 2 weeks, I meet with somebody who I'm educating on why a CPO role is important, or they're asking me, well, how do you become one, right?
Yeah.
I think that would be cool, and then just understanding how you got to where you are is also would be cool, and then we can kind of like dissect this like your journey in a surgical way, to understand the processes you use to get here. How's that?
Okay, but before we go back in time to the journey to the CPO, I do just want to dig in a little bit to what you just said, because I'm just a huge believer in the importance of partner operations. And I know it's not as like sexy as some of the other components of partnerships, but I actually think it's just critical to have that plumbing. And the way you've just described how your mind works, I'd love to hear if you agree with that statement, if that's like a big priority for you as well, because I just think it's like the unsung hero of how partnerships at scale can really be effective.
100%. So actually my very first hire in this role when I came to Trintech to build the partner program was a partner ops person.
That's great. Just like a CRO, you're like, I need my ops person to help me so I can go focus on, business oriented tasks.
Yeah. Well, I mean, how do I know what I'm trying to do if I don't know what the state of the union, looks like today? So that's exactly what she did first was, just really try to take a look back, understand truly where we're coming from a KPI standpoint. Then we stood up all of our dashboards and all of the things that we wanted to track and trend line and really start to measure the business so we could make insightful decisions about what to do next. We couldn't have done that without the proper foundation and that stability being in place. And so I think that's a huge component of what we need to achieve at scale, even today. And it's interesting how it changes over time, because once you establish your core KPIs and you understand what your board wants to hear about, and you understand what your executive leader team wants to hear about, and the folks on your team and your partners, then you can get creative and start to say, where can we optimize some of these things? So we have the data, we have our initial actions, we have results from what we've done so far, but where can we get some qualitative insights too out of all this data? What is it really telling us? How do we go back as humans and do some more things to make it even more awesome? So ops is a critical part of that. And then when you think about, from a go-to-market perspective and a direct sales and partnership sort of interplay perspective, the sales ops team plays a critical role in trying to make sure that we are working harmoniously together and that we have, some attractive reasons really to come together, leverage partners in the right way, and really just create that kind of kumbaya. Without an ops team to help us with those processes and proper incentives and things like that, it would be really challenging to do well. Great question.
Well said.
Yeah.
All right, back to the journey.
Somebody asked the one question she wanted to ask on this podcast, so I think she's going like, okay, I'm done. I got my stuff. That's great. All right, so let's understand like how you got to where you are, because I also have a hypothesis for all the CPOs that are getting elevated. But
yeah,
did you work at Deloitte? Because that's Asher's hypothesis.
It's close. It's close. Not Deloitte, but close.
It's just a placeholder. So
I have listened to your podcast, so I know that you all have interviewed some really heavy hitter CPOs, that are running the biggest ecosystems in the world. And they have some impressive and amazing stories to tell. I love learning and listening from folks like that. I'm not that person. So let me give you a more approachable path to CPO.
Yeah.
And I think that, the reason that's important is because that's not probably where most of our CPOs are going to live.
Yeah.
At least
right.
I hope not, right? I hope that we have tons of B2B SaaS companies and other companies in other industries that think about this model as a way to achieve their business goals, and they start to make the investment in this role. That's my hope. And we know there's a lot more of those companies than the large enterprise vendors and big fours. So I would say my path was a little bit more, there's some stops along the way, but I think what is probably consistent about many of us on the journey is that I really had to learn a lot of different functions along the way that I then can put in a big mixing bowl and apply those to this work. Yep. I think it's really, really challenging for somebody to come from one corner of a business and work their way into a CPO role. The thing that I like about this work, and the thing that I think all of my teammates along the way and over the years have liked about this work, is that no day is the same. There is a wonderful, energizing mix of things to focus on and areas to optimize and people to talk to and projects to work on, and so much internal progress that can be made through this work that I just don't think you get in any other role. So I did a little bit of accounting. I led a marketing team. I did some business development. I feel like I've done pretty much everything along the way. And if I didn't have all of that, it'd be really challenging for me to do this role effectively.
Were you at McKinsey, Bain, BCG, EY, Deloitte, Accenture, or any at KPMG or any of those companies before?
You got to make it to, I think, number 6 now. It's I was at Grant Thornton for about 8 years.
Yeah. Asher's right again.
I'm like,
yeah.
So my hypothesis is the CPOs are business people first, solving a business problem through partnerships, versus the other way around, which is where most partnership leaders have come from, which is they're solving a revenue problem through partnerships, but that's not really a business problem. The business problem is the buy, build, partner problem, and the revenue problem is the leads, ops, deals problem. So once again, we have empirical evidence that
a crystal ball.
This role does involve either
consulting firm or a consulting firm. I did start in the latter first, right? So, the first role that I really had where it was a true sort of partner responsibility was at a global software company is a family-owned global software company, not without its family-owned challenges and intricacies. But I learned so much there because I was really getting into that at the time of there was still like IBM Co-op and MDF and these I-series things that were happening, and then we were also sort of transitioning into software subscription models and cloud and
Yeah.
at the time Oracle had made all these acquisitions, and so it was changing the dynamics of the way that we integrated and our APIs and all of these things. So I had really kind of a crash course in that side of things before I ever made it to the consulting side, sat in advisory, and did more of the scaling and business scaling types of exercises that come with the services side of partnership. But I think that's what's been so helpful to me as I've been on both the vendor side and the services side for long enough stretches to really learn what each needs from each other, and to observe the customer base of both and to understand what, most importantly, what they need. And that's always sort of at the heart of my strategy and my team's strategy is how are we delivering quality outcomes for our prospects and our clients? That's number one. That is the reason we partner. And luckily, we get to have a little fun along the way, and we get to learn from each other along the way. And that's just the cherry on top.
And what type of partners do you have? I think it's interesting, the comment, Asher, that you shared at the beginning of the story. Because I think the reason the discrepancy in that answer, right, like integrations aren't partnerships, is because my guess is that those companies, they aren't. Integration partnerships can also be revenue driving, right? You can be co-selling, you can be sharing referrals, but you don't have to be. You can literally just build the integration and then it's serving a different function and a different business metric.
Yeah.
Clearly, in his mind, real partnerships are the revenue driving partnerships, and that's the 30% of the companies, and then the 85% are when you take into account these others. So would love to hear what type of partnerships you have kind of in your purview.
Yeah, absolutely. So I would say over the years, I've had pretty much all of them, right? But right now, kind of where we focus is, the large GSIs and SIs and what they're doing on the advisory and consulting and implementation sides of things. We certainly work with, some referral partners and sort of, more friendly types of relationships where we just exchange, leads and information back and forth and have those relationships more like associations and referrals.
Yeah.
And then certainly I would say a growing area for us and something I've been really focused on, here in the last 18 months in this particular role at this company is our ISV work. So how do we work with other tech companies?
Yes.
And what's interesting is that, that first software company where I kind of cut my teeth, they were actually really good at this. And they didn't really even mean to be. Small little shop that's actually owned by Next World now, which is an ERP. So impressive story there. They've managed to do a lot of great things. And I met some wonderful people, worked with a lot of wonderful people there for 8 years. But they actually did this really well. They had open APIs from the beginning. They understood the need to get these certified. And then to build on that, how do we actually create relationships with some of these larger tech companies? And so it was very interesting to go from that to, some other companies just aren't thinking about it that way. They're thinking about how do I do the basic certifications necessary to make sure my code and my product is delivered in a sound way and I can make it on a marketplace or I can make it on a page. But the currency is lost without a little bit more work, right? What if that software company is not going to talk about us in a positive light, and if we can't really leverage the currency of the goodness that comes out of that integration, it's very passive. It's just the basics, and that's not good enough, right? And sometimes you'll even have customers ask, I would like to understand better what you're doing with each other. What is the relationship? Don't just send me to the page. Because what I want to know is when stuff goes south, how are you guys going to work together to get me to a better place? And is that something I'm going to have to manually run with, or are you going to be able to jump in and talk to each other? And so I think the market and buyers are becoming so much smarter about how all of this does work in the background. And they've been burned enough times to ask the right questions, which I think is lovely. And so taking a proactive approach to that, to think about how do we work better with other tech companies is something that I love to solve. That's one of those areas where there's a lot of optimization. still ahead. And I think even some of the big enterprise vendors have changed their stance on this over the last few years, which
Yep.
is interesting. It's no longer just, do we have a certified integration? It's, oh, we could actually probably co-sell together. And
Mm-hmm.
what would that look like? And it's not just you versus me or your product versus my product. We're trying to come at it from a more consumer mindset of, this customer wants an experience, they want an outcome. They don't want a onesie twosie transaction here, a onesie twosie transaction there, and lots of wasted time in the middle. It's just not the life that we live anymore, in our daily lives, nor at work. So I think that that's been a really interesting area, and still a lot to be done there. But it's something I enjoy making progress on.
Well, if you think about it, so all modern companies have customer success, or we're in it for the customer as like the number one thing, right? And then all modern companies now, definitely by the end of the year, are going to say we're in it for the partners, right?
Yeah.
Like that's happening right now, right? And then everybody is going to centralize on this word outcome. And then the customer is going to say, well, I have a workflow and I need all these things, right? And so our messaging is going to say, we're going to help you get to an outcome. But to get to that outcome, you need to manage these 7 apps yourself.
Yeah.
It's a completely like wrong. And I remember I was at a SalesLoft partner day, and I was just talking about the value of ISVs, and because that's the world I grew up in too, right? And I just thought that like all the entire world revolves around ISVs, which again at some level I still do. I may be completely wrong, but so I finished talking about ISVs and this and that, and then there's a lady in the audience that basically like stood up and just said, Asher, like I just don't want to deal with managing these 7 apps. Can we just have somebody else to just manage this, because they all have different roadmaps.
Yeah.
I have different things I need to get to, and I can't spend all my time helping these people figure out their roadmaps. They should be talking to each other and figuring themselves out.
Yeah.
So that was actually one of the data points where I was like, oh, partnership leaders is needed.
Yeah.
So
Oh,
uh,
100%. That's a great story, and it's true. It's especially as I think we're kind of shifting back from a time where we thought one platform could conquer all and everybody was trying to consolidate. And, it was how do we make a broad investment and have it fit our needs in lots of areas? And, now you see analyst guidance geared more toward, make sure that your solution is working for the function it's supposed to be performing for. And so you see more of the specific solutions coming back into play that are purpose built, or at least a little bit more appropriate for the results that they're trying to achieve, and not trying to force everything into one box. And so you just end up with more transactions and more tools. And how do you just rationalize all that? And part of the burden of that needs to be on the vendors. We have to have a way to play in the same sandbox, even if we're not necessarily strategic partners and going to market together and selling one another's solutions actively. We still have to make sure that interplay is symbiotic, just so the experience is good. Because
Yeah, I think it's interesting though, because one thing you definitely see is, this still goes on. It's improved a little bit, but I think it's tough, right? When there is no further business relationship, you see ISVs build integrations to each other, and usually it's the smaller party, but it could be whoever needs it more, whoever's customer's demanding it more, right? No one within that company really fully owns the destiny of that integration. They build it and it sits and it's there, and it often doesn't get updated. And the challenge now is like people are updating their products faster than ever. And I think with AI, this is only going to accelerate. And very quickly, products can become out of whack, right? It doesn't even have to be, it's not usually that the integration broke. It's that there's other functionality that renders the original use case kind of obsolete or not useful. But it's tough, right? Because customers do demand, as Asher was saying, they want those out of the box integrations because they don't want to take on that themselves of like paying someone or dealing with it. So ISVs are motivated to build it and have at least 20, 30 to offer the customer, but it's like, who's maintaining those? And how's that value being articulated to the business in a clear way that justifies having a developer or a product manager be responsible for ensuring they go up over time. And I think it's kind of a mess across the market, honestly. It's very hazy. And I think people are still trying to figure out the value and who's going to own what.
Yeah. No, I think that's a pervasive issue. To be honest, my approach to that is not to say that this individual or that individual is going to be responsible for, monitoring and for, updating and creating a roadmap that makes space for, some of those changes or even keeps track of those changes. My approach is to say that you all need to be responsible for understanding the changes, making room for the changes, allowing the progress of what we're putting out there, as a product to be reflective of what else is happening in the marketplace that's really important to that customer. So that's where the internal, change management comes in, and really building a culture that's partner friendly and partner first. That's something that my team and I, we spend a ton of time on. Probably spent the first year and a half doing nothing more than that here in this role. But by doing that, you just turn on, so many different channels that were previously not part of the process. You get further so much faster once you have the internal buy-in, the internal understanding, cross-functionally. And I don't just mean marketing and sales, right? It's like you said earlier, ops, accounting. How is accounting billing our partners in situations where a fee needs to be exchanged? What kind of tone are they using? What letter are they using? How are they addressing them? What does it look like when we have to go back and ask again? Are we using a friendly tone of voice? Like, what does that look like? How are we billing our BPO customers? Are we sending a bill directly to the end user because we shouldn't be? Those kinds of things, right? So if you don't really examine, and really just get in everybody's business a little bit in a respectable way, and just try to become, part of what makes their team and their process better, then it's going to be really challenging, I think, to be successful in a partner leadership role or a CPO role for sure. You sort of have to have your hands in all of the pots.
I have two comments to make. One, Kelly, we should definitely do a blog piece on the destiny of an integration. That was a very key statement right there. I was like, oh man, that's a good one. I'm sure we can get some people from the community to I think it could be a community piece too. You're like, hey, what do you think this could be? But the other thing is, like, to go back to this point about just integrations and et cetera, or just working with ISVs. It's kind of like the business strategy, right? Which is companies that get funded, they say, here's a use case, and go sell it to one department, meaning one person, and then go find other departments, other people in the same company and solve the same use case, right? So that's one way to build your business. The other way to build your business is you find a persona, and then you do everything for that person and make them look like a hero, and having gone through both of these motions, right? I like the pick a persona and make them a hero, because then you can do everything for them, and your platform strategy becomes clearer too. But also, who you're going to partner with, which is either because you can have like best in class partners and then non best in class partners, because like there's some buyers that will only buy best in class, and then there's the tinkerers, right, who'll just buy anything, and they'll say, we'll figure it out, we have a long way ahead for us to get to our goals. So I think it just depends on like what your company's strategy is for winning the market. But I'll say my preference is win the person, and then the market will take care of itself. But again, I may be wrong on this one.
No, I see that for sure. And I like the idea, and you kind of touched on it there, is, the triangulation between, your organization and what you provide, the partner or partners that you team up with, and the customer, and what that outcome looks like as a result of that triangulation, is where really the secret sauce is made. And if you're not thinking about it that way, if you're just thinking about it bidirectionally, and I am trying to get my product installed at this customer, and along the way there might be a sidebar with a partner, that's not the way to envision the outcome. It's really that triangulation. And I think, starting whether it's the sales cycle or the relationship or whatever it may be, depending on the scenario, with that mindset at the beginning, always gets you to a better place, a more quality outcome with a referenceable customer, which is always the goal. But really provides that framework for repeating that with that same partner or that same type of customer. And they go tell their friends and their friends and their friends. And I mean, that's the power of partnerships, is those good experiences will earn you, 10 times more of those good experiences. So just having that mindset from the very beginning is critical. And that's something you have to teach in other areas where folks are not used to this dynamic. Sales teams often need a little bit of coaching on that, why we talk to partners differently, how and why we bring partners in early to deals when we're running sales cycles together, why that's not an afterthought, because it's not going to provide the best outcome for anyone. And so those are areas we typically have to spend a little bit more time, but it's worth it.
All right, let's unpack your journey to becoming a CPO, because I think that part of the how the situation became the situation to then elevate you, right? I think that's probably what a lot of people are trying to figure out right now. I have about 6 or 7, maybe 8 VPs that have it in their board plan to become CPOs by the end of the year when they hit the revenue milestones, right? Or just company milestones. So it'd be good to get to hear your story. And and then by virtue of that, there'll be hopefully 100 other
They can
CPOs.
update their decks.
Exactly. That too,
Exactly.
She did it.
Exactly.
Yeah, I think, so I mentioned I sort of started in accounting, which is definitely not the role for me. It was really boring. Our CEO at the time could see that on my face and sort of plucked me upstairs and said, "You come up here and you do the more fun jobs." So I did that. And then ultimately led, the marketing team at that organization and did a little bit of sales and all kinds of things, right? And just learned a tremendous amount. I took sort of what I had learned there about some of the larger enterprise, systems and vendors and programs, and that's when I took, that knowledge to Grant Thornton, and was initially just really responsible for, the partnership around a large Oracle practice. But as things progressed and as, the strategy at Grant Thornton progressed, a lot more relationships came into the fold, a lot more alliances came into the fold. Ultimately, what I did, with that is start to apply a more scalable approach for what we were doing internally with respect to all those partnerships, because they were being led by different managing directors and partners in the firm who weren't necessarily using a consistent approach or, weren't going to market in a similar fashion. Everything was just very siloed. And I could tell, very quickly there were some efficiencies to gain there. And, because I was a partner and alliances person, I understood all the things in the background that we had to do to get our people trained and to get CPE credits and all of those things that are administratively burdensome in a professional services environment. But I had some hacks to that. And so we could apply that at scale. And so really ultimately just ended up leading the approach for 30 or 40 of our most significant alliances across advisory and tax. And the other thing too there, which I think is so interesting and really kind of bolstered sort of my experience and my skills in this area, was the concept of 360-degree relationships. And I don't know that you get that in some of the smaller firm experiences. So this is one of the things I'm very grateful for my time there. And I'm grateful for a lot of things at my time at Grant Thornton. I loved working for that company. The opportunity to see a 360-degree relationship as both a customer and a partner of an organization gives you a tremendous opportunity, to leverage that, from a business model standpoint, but also kind of fees are we paying on both sides of this equation? Like, can we optimize this? How do we leverage our executive relationships in both areas to, get what we need and, to have that organization have a better impression of us? I think the more, again, back to the idea of we're all adopting more software and more tools, those are coming about more and more and more, those 360-degree relationships. I have several partners that both use my tool and position my tool in the marketplace, implement my tool. And wow, how cool is that? I mean, what an evangelist you've built if you've treated that relationship in the right way. So that was an excellent, kind of learning. I made managing director at Grant Thornton. I think my next step would have been to go for partner. My husband also happens to be a partner. Did not think that tax time would be a lot of fun with two partners in the house. So intentionally kind of started looking for something different. What's interesting is that working in partnerships for so long, you have a lot of access and understanding about all of these other companies and their programs. You almost know a little bit too much, if that makes sense. And especially in that kind of a role, I had so many different partnerships that teams were working, that I kind of had oversight on, and there were a lot that I just frankly did not want to go to. Did not really culturally align with kind of how they did things, or just it didn't really reflect my value system and those kinds of things, right? So when this opportunity came up at Trintech, it was actually really attractive to me because they needed some building, which I hadn't done building in a while, but I do like it. Back to the surgical engineering sort of part of my brain. I have a visceral reaction when things are not working properly, or if it's my house or if it's my kids, whatever it is. I need to fix. It's a blessing and a curse. And so this opportunity for me was just it was something new. There was almost some walking into the unknown, which at that point in my life I really, for some reason, kind of liked. Loved the fact that at the time we had a female CEO, and just all of these things were attractive to me. I also felt like it was an organization where I could make a quick impact. I'd be able to quantify that quickly and show that. All that just to say, I think sometimes we think, going from a big consulting firm like Grant Thornton, where it's, you're a PPMD and there's a lot of like cool things that come with that. You're very respected, and it takes a lot to get there. I mean, you have to really prove yourself to sit on a panel and convince all these really smart people that you're worthwhile and you can do this job. And it's amazing, and it's hard to walk away from that. But I think that there are times in life when we just need to, take a step sideways, or look at things with a new lens and think about, well, what could come of it if I took all of these things that I have and just applied it to a different scenario, a different level of maturity in an organization, and said, I really want to make a quick impact really quickly. And because I care about the people, right? It's not just the partners or the customers, it's the employees. I care about the human aspect of it. I know I can come in here and make change really quick and see that. And of course, on the other side of that is, personally, taking a more elevated title as chief partner officer. But it wasn't a quick journey, but it's something, my now CEO and I had a really frank conversation about a year and a half into my role, was SVP at the time. And I talked to him in Las Vegas, and we were there for another partner conference. And, I said, Darren, here's what I've done so far. I am ready to learn more. I need to be at the table where more is happening, where I can learn, because that's really what keeps me going. I think that's what keeps a lot of us going. Is when we're teaching more than we're learning, we get a little bit backwards, right? We always have to be learning, and that's what's awesome about like Big Four and big consulting. You're just surrounded by so many smart people, and the learning never ends. I think when you come to a smaller organization, sure, you're learning, but at scale, it doesn't. Those opportunities don't always present themselves in a way that you would be used to coming from the services side, where people are paying for your brain, right? Yeah. And so, he was very understanding, because we had done all of that work on the ops side to track the KPIs, to show very clearly what impact we had made on the business in a very short amount of time. It wasn't a tough conversation for me to have. And so then we created that path. And I knew what it was going to take for me to get to that next level. We agreed upon, what the metrics would look like and what the path would be and the timing. And he's a real stand-up Irish guy. He stuck to it. I did my part, and here we are. And I think, how cool of him to say, I'm going to make room for something that doesn't really exist. in this organization and doesn't exist in a lot of companies this size.
Period. Yeah.
That's a bold move, right? Like he kind of stuck his neck out there, but he's been proven to have made the right choice based on all our progress and what the team has done. Like he sees the benefit. He knows.
He probably looked around and said, I don't really have a fixer.
Yeah.
A strategy person, and a fixer. All right, let's bring Mekaela. Okay, so the if we double click on the journey a little bit, right? So how is the SVP role different than the CPO role?
Yeah, it's not like drastically different in terms of what you care about. I think what's different is the company that you're surrounded by and some of the added responsibilities that come with, just having a seat at that table, right? And in our instance, we have a couple of PE firms that we work very closely with and partner closely with, and they're really involved in our business. They're both awesome to work with. So that's been an amazing experience. But that adds a new dynamic into, what I've been doing. So I'm just now finished preparing my board deck for our upcoming board meeting. And so it's just a new kind of layer of sort of exposing the progress that we're making, which I welcome the opportunity, to be able to do that and get the visibility. But it's also given me opportunities, to your point earlier, Asher, talking with folks like Brian Gibson and talking to other portcos. That has been a really, really fun experience and something I wouldn't have had at like a Grant Thornton, where the business model is just different. But I get probably once or twice a week, reach outs from portcos and from teams that are trying to set up their partner program or optimize their partner program, or just like general requests for advice. And I am always happy to jump on those, because anytime I've needed reciprocal, sort of help or guidance on something outside of partnerships or whatever it may be, they're always so much more likely to jump in and help because I've done that for them. So it's an awesome network of other software companies to learn from, and really just to share ideas with.
But you would have that as an SVP too, right? I'm trying to get to the nitty gritty of like what are the two, three things that change, right? So that people are like, oh, okay.
Yeah. I think one question is, what about your relationship with partners, right? Because especially, I don't know how many partners you have, but I will say in like any level of scaled ecosystems, right? It's not just the one-to-one partner relationships anymore. It's somebody needs to be able to effectively be like the face of the program. Yeah. And I feel like SVP, it's often not clear. Does this person run all partner types? Is this person the face for all of us, or is it just some of us? And there's another VP over there who's running different partners, where the chief partner officer makes it very clear. Exactly. So curious if you've sort of taken on more of the face to your whole partner ecosystem in that transition from SVP to CPO.
Yeah. And that's a good way to articulate it, because, yes, as SVP, you're probably going to have access to some of that. You're probably going to have some of those interactions. I think what changes when you formally designate a chief partner officer is you've said, this function and this work is at the top of my list. So I report to the CEO. The CEO has, some very clear objectives and functions that he's highlighting and that he's thinking about as pivotal to the business, right? With the seat at the table, with that elevated, sort of status as a company, but not just as an individual, it just changes the dynamics of, understanding, what do we care about for our customers? What do we care about for our partners? It's like, oh no, they're serious. Like, they're really serious about this. And we are very serious about this. And I think depending on, where you're coming from, in our situation, we have competitors that don't necessarily do this as well, or their ecosystem doesn't necessarily love the experience as much. It's one more reason we say, hey, no, we do love this experience. We do it really well. And here's one reason why, is because we've placed investment and emphasis on this particular function as its own thing. We're not saying the CRO owns partnerships, because then it becomes only a revenue-based function. And that is not what partnerships are about. We're trying to retain customers. We're trying to build an awesome product that stands the test of time, that evolves. And if we're only focused on bookings targets and revenue, that is not going to be the outcome that we achieve as a company. So it really does need to be its own post. So that alone, Asher, just saying Trintech has a CPO. Okay,
Yep.
well, every portco in the system is thinking, oh, they have a chief partner officer. They must take it really seriously. They really do care. Okay, so
Yep.
we should have conversations. We should think about this. So it just brings a little bit different level of magnitude, I think,
Yeah.
to the conversation and a little bit more seriousness to
Well,
really
to
our.
me, it's like, and having now spent some time with the number of CPOs. By the way, I also know SVPs in your portcos, and I'm constantly challenging them, like, hey, when is this going to happen, right? And what
Yeah,
do we need to do to elevate you to get to that point? But you
yeah,
are the trailblazer, I believe, in the Vista Equity portfolio, who's kind of charting a path for the other like leaders. But I think the as I've spent more time with let's call it not the FANG CPOs, right? Like those people are really trying to figure out how do we build a business, and then that business has certain things that we need to do, whether we need to produce a product or we need to distribute a product or we need to support the consumption of that product, right? Like, and then that's the conversation that's happening, and then where partners fit into that is
yeah,
what a CPO is like needed to do. And then you go into a advisory role versus an execution role, because as an SVP, yes, you may go to a board meeting here and there, but you're not
yeah,
invited, like you don't have a seat there, right? Especially as a channel chief, you for sure don't have it, right?
yeah.
I haven't come across any channel chiefs that are invited to board meetings regularly to give an update, who will then go hang out with other board members and leverage their networks to like solve this like Bible partner problem, and with their other colleagues. It's just, at least I just haven't found that convo to take place.
Yeah, absolutely. And you wouldn't have exposure to the variety of conversation that happens in those board meetings. And that's where we find new opportunities,
Yeah.
to engage our partner ecosystem and to build new relationships and to learn more about, what the market needs. Because if you think about all of the experience and all the observances those board members have, they can share that with you. You can share with them, hey, listen, I have a way to solve this, or I have a perfect partner to bring in,
Yeah.
for this. And it's just a wonderful way to get more facets of the conversation rolling, which would have been challenging to do, at the SVP level.
100%.
Um,
Yeah.
yeah, and in most companies, you have a chief, CXO that is responsible for each of the teams and all of the things that are happening. And when you're sort of just in this abyss, there's no ultimate, governance for the partner team or program, and so you're just sort of hitting your head on the ceiling.
Yeah.
This gives you, sort of that protected space where it's understood, that you are working on this project, and that will require a lot of cross-functional, work and investment from folks, but it's yours, and you own it, and you own the good and the bad. And
Yeah.
and that's, part of what changes when you go from SVP to chief partner
Yeah,
officer.
the radical accountability. And just for the folks that are listening, like a board meeting is the CEO's one-on-one with his boss. So if you're going to that, like the person's serious about partnerships, right? And then the way a board meeting is conducted is there are a number of, like, at least larger companies, there are a number of preparatory calls so that you are getting your top priorities championed through board members, so they understand what's at stake, what resourcing is going to require, and then there is a voting that takes place. But a board meeting is normally like about 4 hours long, or somewhere there. But there is a open door session where all the executives are invited, and then there is the closed door session with only the CEO and maybe the CFO are invited to, and that's actually where the real like prioritization and decisioning happens,
Yeah.
because boards only have one power. They can only fire the CEO. They can't actually organizationally fire anybody else. So if you're going to a board meeting, it's not because you're going to get fired. It's because the business really needs you to step up and lead the business, not lead partnerships. And so it's like it's just the game changes, and it's again, like, no offense to like channel leaders, alliance leaders, and stuff like that. It's just that world is optimizing revenue, and then this world is like optimizing relationships, and it's the mindset is just very different.
Yeah, and you have to be able to translate what you know is qualitatively advantageous to a board deck.
Yeah.
right? And it's just the KPIs alone are not going to do that. You really have to start to learn the language. And I would say that's a big, change from SVP to Chief Partner Officer is just how do I speak the language of my stakeholders to make sure that I continue to get funding, I continue to get the mind share that I need. And, Asher, to your point, the makeup of that board meeting, the underlying sort of politics in that board meeting.
Yeah.
How do I make sure my CEO understands what it is that we do for the company?
Yes.
How do I make sure he or she is like well equipped with
Yeah.
the latest, the greatest, and can evangelize in rooms that I'm not in why this is such an important part of the function? And I'm just blessed because mine does a great job of that. But
Yeah.
it's something to think about if it's not on your radar. How do I educate and equip my C-suite even really with with the nuggets they need to make this successful for us?
Yeah.
Can you
And
share anything about because what I'm hearing you saying is like there's the KPIs which are necessary, right? But then there's the story you're telling around the KPIs
Yeah.
and making sure it's resonating. And of course, every company is going to be different. Can you share any ways that you've conceptualized this? Because I actually think this is really challenging, right? And people probably kind of know that it's something that you have to do, but actually doing it is a totally different task.
Yeah.
yeah,
It's
sorry. Right before we go there, I just want to like unpack one thing that Mekaela just said. Right, the issue here is the CEO caring, right?
yes.
Because that is the ultimate person that can support a org-wide partnership strategy. If the CEO cares, the CRO, CMO, CCO, they're all going to care, right? So like there's a little bit of fallacy in the market, like that we should just go like spend a lot of time with CROs and convince them about partnerships. I think that's cool. There's some level of like alignment around like, hey, let's go spend a bunch of time with CMOs and CCOs. Like the CEO is their boss. That person, if they're not telling them that like, hey, where are the partners? Because they're integral to our winning strategy, like that person is not caring for that, right? Because the CRO's job is to optimize revenue. It's really hard. Like I've done it before. It's extremely hard, right? And then a CMO's job is to optimize markets. And that's another really tough job. So somebody else going to tell them like that the partnerships is important. I think you'll get somewhere based on your relationships and stuff like that. But there is if the business is set up where partners are integral to everything, the CEO has to be, and that to me is like the industry-wide case for people to go for these CPO roles, because if you are able to get to that level, then you are having a one-on-one with the CEO, right?
Yeah.
And there's been a number of stories in the market where the partnership leader reported to the CRO or reported to the CMO or reported to somebody else, and then that got whacked.
Yeah.
And then the CEO talked to them as part of their exit interview process. And the CEO was like, hey, like, what advice would you give to us to make sure this doesn't happen? And then at that point finds 17 things that they really cared about. And then they just never heard about it because the reporting line was so off.
Yeah. Yeah, it's a really critical aspect, and of course, it's going to be situational. It's in some cases, right? But I'm a firm believer that if you're thinking about naming a chief partner officer, if you feel like you have a succession plan where somebody could take that role and really elevate the function in your organization, that person needs to report to whomever is ultimately responsible. And in our case, that's the CEO, right? And to your point, Kelly, before about how do you really get ingrained into the narrative, it is hand-to-hand combat. And I'll tell you an exact sort of illustration of how we've done this is, initially kind of on this timeline that I mentioned, right, between my CEO and I. What does this look like? What's the transition look like? And there's communications that go out and all of this. And he's smart and he cares. And he said, "What do you need from me?" The number one thing I need from you is repetition, right? When we have company calls, when we have, company-wide meetings, when we have emails that come out from you, when you're doing press, when you're doing, any of these things, just say the word partner. Let's talk about what we're doing on the partner side. It's funny because we had a joke at our sales kickoff for a couple of years in a row that every time you hear the word partner, you take a shot, because it's just repetition, repetition, repetition. But it's really what we need and we needed at the time for folks to just latch on and understand it was going to be part of our culture. So I can either adjust and understand and learn and figure out how to make this part of my world too, or I can resist. And resisting is probably not going to end well for anybody. And luckily for us, for our culture, it wasn't a tough sell. Now you hear every function talking about partners and incorporating partners into their plans and their worlds. And it's a more natural motion. And of course, not every region and every team is going to follow at the same pace. That's where you do that optimization work, those little, quick nip and tucks. But as a whole, the surgery is complete. We have a wonderful result.
You really do want to be a surgeon.
But I mean, yeah, that's it. And that carries over too to those board conversations. So when he's in the room and I'm not in the room, whether it's a board meeting or he's got a call, I know he's talking about it, right? He's telling me kind of the things that he's going to cover off, and I give him the ammunition that he needs to be able to tell really good stories. And the other thing you asked is, how do I make sure I know, or how do I know what to kind of give him? And for my team, we have a set of best practices that we follow just in general. They could be applicable to a partner team and they could be applicable to your family, right? But it's 10 sort of best practices and guidelines. And number 5 is listen more and talk less. And I really try to do that, even though we're talking here today, and that's what this is about. And I do like to talk at the appropriate times. You will see me on calls and in meetings really pretty quiet. I am listening. I'm trying to understand, for example, my partner managers, my alliance managers, how are their relationships evolving? Are there any areas where I think there's some red flags? What could we be doing more of? Is one of them talking to a member from here and the other one's talking to a member from here and they haven't brought that together yet? Like those kinds of things. So I'm intensely listening and trying to then translate that over to my KPIs and my quantifiable metrics to tell a story, to have a narrative. So it's not just bookings targets, pipeline, all the things that we get sucked into. What's the narrative? Just like if it were its own business, what's the narrative of this business and where are we going? That's what we try to build and reflect.
And on that note, I would just say that bookings targets are really important, and I don't want this to be like, oh, hey, we were on a Partnership Leaders podcast, and like they were saying that this is not important. This is extremely important because that's how you fund your business if you want to treat partnerships
right.
as a business. All right. As usual, all these conversations are amazing. We should do one massive session. I say this on every podcast that's like 4 hours long, and then we could really get through it. But I also want to be respectful to like Mekaela's time and our listeners' time. Mekaela, we will bring you back on in some form. We have a couple of ideas of follow up after the podcast. But thank you so much for spending some time with us. I can see why you are. I don't know if they published the VISTA Equity top exec list, and they don't share it like why you are that. But also like I spent some time with Meg Higgins and stuff like that. You're all very amazing, accomplished executives. It's very proud of you all.
Well, thank you. And thank you for the time. Again, I love, what you're doing and how you're bringing this community together and really just creating some more exposure for this really important work. So look forward to some face-to-face things in the future too, and can't wait to get more involved. So thank you for the time that you're spending on this. It's great.
All right, Kelly, thanks as always.
Thanks.
See you all at another episode pretty soon.
Thanks so much.